I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to work as hard as I can.
There is no past, there's no future, there's just this moment right here.
If I did that, if I can get through that, like, come at me.
Changing how I saw myself, like as a man, not just as an athlete.
It's okay that I struggle. It's okay. That's part of the deal. It's how I respond to it.
Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to another episode of the Limitless Athlete podcast. My name is Tom Foxley. I'm the founder of Mindset Rx'd, a coaching service for functional athletes. Let's phrase it like that. Who, like, say, if you're a CrossFit athlete, if you compete in the other many guises that pretend to be CrossFit, but they're really not, this episode is for you. And we're focusing today on a complete guide to the mental side of performance. And whether you are just starting out in training your mindset, or whether you're just starting out in training full stop, whether you are at the top of your game, just looking to eke out an extra couple of percent, but you find that your mind gets in your way, this episode is intended to give you a complete overview of the system that we use at Mindset Rx to coach our athletes so that you can take this away and begin applying things to your training. Like, there's a few practical parts in today's podcast. There's also a really good theoretical understanding to give you this kind of framework. So without further ado, I'm going to go into a deep dive into what we call the RRP method, which is essentially a three-legged stool that you have to balance out if you're ever going to achieve your potential as an athlete and stop your mentality getting in the way of performance and stop that self-doubt, stop the negative thoughts and emotions that disrupt your performance. So let me minimize myself, bring up my notes, and let's get on with today. In keeping with the last episode on authenticity, you'll see I have not shaved today if you're watching the video. I have not done my hair, but here we are. We are here just giving our best today. So today starts off with a story. It starts off with my story, not just because I like to talk about myself, like we all do, but because it explains how we got to the RRP method and highlights a few issues along the way that you will have to watch out for as an athlete training your mindset. So my interest in mindset, well, I think this is why I'm a good mindset coach. I've always been interested in why we do the things we do, but it heightened when I was in training for the Royal Marines. Royal Marines are an elite arm of the British Armed Forces, and I don't want to make myself out to be a war hero. In fact, compared to almost everyone else in the Royal Marines, I'd say that I've done nothing. I did some training that was very difficult, but I was far from the hero that some of these guys are. But I was going through this training physically, mentally taxing to the limit. My interest in mindset started because we all know that when we're working out, our mind gives up before our body. Like David Goggins, like, not a particularly massive fan of his approach to mindset and mentality. Like he sums this up perfectly though, that when we think we're 100% done, we're only about 40% of the way there. We know intuitively that our mind gives up because it's a protective mechanism. It's your mind does not want you to break your bones like training. Like, it's a good thing that we have that limit there. But it does hold you back a little too soon. So what we need to do is encourage us to go on. And this is where my interest in mindset really started to settle in. And I think it's where your interest in mindset probably started to kind of embed itself. And it's where the problems show up, which is I'm trying to do something physically. I'm trying to push harder. I'm trying to win this workout. In my case, I was trying to earn a green beret, which I can actually see down below me. And this is something that we want to achieve, but we find our mind gets in the way. So we find that negative self-talk stops us. We find that we get overwhelmed thinking about the magnitude of the workout. And like I said, this is where I started. And everything for me was like all about how can I suffer better? How can I be tougher? How can I have more grit, determination? How can I force my way? How can I train my willpower? And like, so it's this very masculine side of working out, which so many athletes have to develop. And it's really important. It's just limited. It's an important part to develop. And it's also combined with very tactical, practical tools like chunking workouts. So I did the final commando test is what's called the 30 miler. Very descriptive name. You run 30 miles with a load over some pretty rough terrain. Have to do it in a set time, 8 hours, or I think 7 hours if you're an officer. I wasn't, but 8 hours. You do it as a troop, and after a lot of training and breaking you down to that point, so you're in a pretty rubbish state by the time you get to that point. And this 30 miler, it seems incredibly daunting at the time. At the time, I think the furthest that I'd run was with load, especially, it was like 12 miles. Something like that. I had no idea if I could do it, and like my hips were chafed horrendously. I'd already failed one of the commando tests that I was going to I had to retake. So I was drained. I was worried my heart palpitations were going to start up and really kick me off this course. That, in all honesty, if I'd been honest in my application, I shouldn't have been there. But I was trying to overcome this challenge, and it seemed daunting. And what I had to learn to do, and what I'd learned to do up until that point, and probably the reason why I managed to get myself through, despite it being very difficult, is yes, there was meaning associated for it. I had a deeper why, all that kind of stuff. Like, I had something that I was trying to prove to myself in the outside world, which again isn't the best driver of success, but I had it there. This tool that I used to great success, and I've used it carrying on in my work life. I've used it carrying on even relationships and conversations, and training my dog, and all these kind of things that is useful. And then every workout ever since was chunking. We learned to chunk workouts into, instead of thinking about the whole workout, the whole 30 miles, I started thinking about just 1 mile at a time. Just 1 mile. I'm going to do this 1 mile. I'm going to do 10 more minutes and chunk this down. I'm going to get to that, I'm going to get to that tree or that wood block in the distance. I'm going to go and get to that shrub. I'm going to get to that high point over there, and just keep on taking one step after the other until I can just achieve a more attainable goal. And when we use this, what's termed as spotlight consciousness, when we narrow our awareness to achieving one specific goal, we can do that. But when we're overwhelmed by a massive goal, when we're overwhelmed by something challenging, that limits us. So this is why chunking works. The downside of just focusing on this performance aspect, on how can I suffer better and how can I perform at my peak in workouts, well, I'll tell you where I ended up and see whether you resonate with it. I was miserable. I was burnt out. I was stressed. I was constantly overwhelmed. My self-doubt was crushing. I didn't believe that I wanted to be there. The imposter syndrome that I had was unreal. That created so many limitations in itself. And really, this chunking and these performance-based tactics, they were just coping mechanisms to deal with that, because that was the biggest limitation. And really, I just didn't feel good enough. Like, it was like constantly scared of being judged. And what I'm saying here is, we can have all the performance tactics in the world, but eventually we're going to run up against a deeper limit, a truer limit, one that's deeper embedded in our subconscious mind, our unconscious mind, and a story that limits us. And we're always going to butt up against that unless we address the story. And I didn't know that until then, or until much later in my life. And really, this lack of attention to my own mindset at a deep level, a true level, at an emotional and story-based level, that lack of attention there, what it did is made me eventually leave the Marines, something I really, like, to some degree I regret it to this day, but over the immediate years after, I massively regretted it. It was a big mistake in my life, and something that I think if I was going to live again, I'd probably change up if I could still get to this same point somehow. But it's unless we address the deeper issues, unless we address the story behind this, unless we address the regulation behind this as well, what's going to happen is we're just going to hit our limit over and over and over and over again. No matter how many visualization techniques we use, no matter how good we are at focusing, the subconscious mind is so much more powerful. And then I found this out really because I was trying to set up the CrossFit gym, CrossFit Palestra, it was called. Took out a massive loan that I definitely couldn't afford to repay. Started doing boot camps, like it was getting very popular, but I was really struggling. And this is about the same time I was coming towards the end of the Marines as well. So my self-worth was very low because I was quitting on something that I truly wanted to believe, and I felt kind of helpless in there. And I was going through these real struggles in so many ways. I was living in a flat share that wasn't exactly healthy. All these kind of things started getting in the way. So I was trying to set up this gym, and I just happened to start a podcast at the same time, which was focused really on the mindset or that men share. It was called the Alpha Movement, which was very macho, masculine branding. But eventually I interviewed this couple, Brian Grasso and Carrie Campbell. Brian was a sports psychologist with a very kind of Taoist spiritual lens, and Carrie, his wife, was a licensed counselor, and they really blew me away in a podcast. They blew me away in this podcast that I was interviewing them on because they really touched my heart, and they seemed to see me for who I was, which with compassion, they saw me as the scared boy that I was, I think, and they really tried to help me. And eventually, through a deep yearning to solve the issue inside me, but also to help others, I embarked on their coaching to become a mindset coach. And this introduced me to real mindset training because, like I said, I was just using these performance-based tactics. I was trying to push harder in workouts. I was developing things that are actually really useful tools like the arch. So a way of framing workouts and selecting the right self-talk to serve the environment you're in. I was running up against my limiting belief, which at the time was, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. That's all I saw the world through. That's my lens. And Brian and Carrie, they introduced me to what I would frame as narrative-based work or story-based work. This is where we believe something and we make it out to be true. And I discovered all sorts of stories, and I saw everyone else's stories all of a sudden. I was like, I get this. I really get this. And over the next few years, I hit so much depth in this, and I became a much better version of myself, and eventually led to setting up Mindset Rx'd. I coached so many athletes through just this lens, and then a bit of the kind of the performance aspect as well. And it got incredible results, but there's always something missing. Like until 2 years ago, I was like, they're getting great results, but it feels like there's something missing. There feels like a subsection of people that I can't help and I'm struggling to get through to. It's like they can't listen. It's like they're so wrapped up in their story that their whole body is embodied by it. And I was so right, essentially, because I started playing around with breath work. I started playing around with cold exposure. I started changing the physical state of my body intentionally, and realized that my state of consciousness changed as well. My mindset changed in those moments. My thoughts would change. My emotions would change. In the hours afterwards, my mood would elevate after I do certain things, or it'd calm me down, or it'd heighten my anxiety sometimes if I did certain things. I was like, this is the nervous system regulation piece. Like sleep is a huge one. And then I also started playing around with like my caffeine intake levels, because frankly, I'd drink so much caffeine, I get pretty fucked up in day-to-day existence. Like I drink too much and it ruined me. And it really fed into the anxiety that I was feeling and the stress. So inadvertently, I stumbled across 3 pillars of mindset: performance, regulation, and rewiring the story. So we call that regulate, rewire, perform. I started looking for a hierarchy, like what comes first? Is your thoughts are the most important? Is the story you believe the most important? Is the regulation of your nervous system most important? Is it most important to start actually doing the thing you love and excelling there? And what I found was that they are, like I said, 3 legs of the stool. If you just train 1 or 2, the stool's going to fall over still. They feed off each other. There's essentially a real priority here, or a truthful realization that we have to make, that The mind and the body, like I spoke about in our last podcast, are not separate. There is the mind body, there is the body mind. There is this connection between our physical body and the way we feel. Like if you've ever felt nervous, for example, you'll know that it can show up like butterflies in your tummy, like that kind of experience. There's a connection between our physical state and our emotional state, and we have to learn to see that all three influence each other. The performance aspect influences the story that we have, and the regulation piece that regulate, like the state of our nervous system, it influences our performance, obviously, and the strength of our emotions and how we feel them. And then the rewiring piece, the story you believe, it influences the way we perform, of course, because if I believe I'm not good enough, I'm not going to give my all. And also influences the state of our nervous system. If I think over and over again, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, and that becomes a belief, my nervous system will adapt to that as well. So yogis have known this for years. Yogis have, like, this is why I think it's actually the Eastern kind of philosophy / religion as a whole, and a kind of a geographical, I don't know, melting pot of ideas here. This truth has been known, but in Western medicine, the approach is try and compartmentalize stuff. So we look at psychology, if you want to refer it to as psychology, as orthopedics, like it's trying to fix a broken ulna, or it's trying to mend a sprained ankle, or like something like that. And we make the mistake, I think, in terms of training our own mindset, that we can just extract one story neatly and it's not going to have this wider ramification on the rest of us. So the human condition is just this infinitely complex thing, though. It's like I said, our thoughts and emotions are affecting our physical state and vice versa. It's this two-way conversation. Like, you think about everything that's made you. Yes, there's the genetic part. We can't get away from that, and it's absolutely true. But there's also the epigenetic part, which says that depending on the environment that I put you in, your genes will express themselves in different strengths. It's like the volume dial we can turn up and down. Your environment as a child hugely affects this. Your parents' history, their parents' history, their parents' history, that all affects the mentality that you have, the way you choose to mimic other people and other people that you admire. And we have the 4 E's of influence, like evolution, environment, education, and experience. Like, those 4 things will influence you. And then, like, we have our physical element too, like our nervous system regulation, which is like our trained condition. Like, how well trained are you? Are you nasal breathing? Are you mouth breathing? Are you, like, physically, is your body stressed? Do you have fear locked away inside you? Do you have trauma locked away inside you? Whether that's one big traumatic event or a series of small traumatic events, like not being recognized or loved as a child. This all influences your mentality. This all influences who you are. So to try and try this visualization technique, it's going to improve your snatch, is missing the boat completely, because it may help a little bit. But the main problem is in this 3-part methodology: your regulation of your nerve system, the rewiring of your stories, and the performance aspect too. So what have we learned? Thoughts have a physiological root. The thoughts you experience, they influence your physical being. Like, if you're stressed and nervous, you're not going to hit your 1-rep max snatch as well as you could if you're perfectly in a tune with your nervous system. Physical sensations too have a mental emotional signature. If I punch you in the stomach, that pain creates stress in your emotions. Like that, we know that. So you can't separate the body and mind. They're a two-way conversation. They're part of this system. And this is very different from the following ways of thinking that have influenced our mentality and influenced our approach to training mindset in athletes. First one is complete determinism. You're an animal, everything's predictable, you're a system of systems, you can't change what you do. There's like consciousness is just along for the ride. You just got to grit your teeth and get on with it. And then there's the other side of it, which you just have to will your way to success. Just use willpower. Just push yourself. That's all you got to do. And what we have here is a more nuanced way of approaching this. Like, yes, both of those pieces are right, like, but they're right as well as a bunch of other stuff. So mindset is complex, is what we say. Now, I've already said that this is a stool, a three-legged stool, but it's a slightly uneven stool at that. It's become clear to me over time that performance is nice to get quick wins. So training our ability to visualize, or our mental reset buttons, or character skill training is great to get quick wins. It moves us along quickly. But there's something deeper always that can limit us, which is the regulation and rewire. So when we work with athletes, this is always where we begin. Regulation of the nerve system, rewiring, because they can massively affect the performance, whereas performance is like, it's a weak community. It doesn't talk much about how it's feeling to the rest of the body, or the rest of the mind body. So we have to start these kind of, what's our biggest opportunity basically? Well, it's the regulation and the rewiring. So regulation. This means training your nervous system to be in the right state. As a big overview and a very simple view of this, we have two states our nervous system can be in: a sympathetic state and a parasympathetic state. We can think about this, again, this is a very simplistic way of viewing it, but I think it's nice as an overview for this. We can think of your sympathetic state as the gas or accelerator in your car. This makes you do things, it makes you push. Stress, anxiety, they live on this side of the occasion. And when we want to work hard and when we want to achieve aggressively and we have to sprint, our sympathetic nervous system will kick in. When we have too much caffeine, our sympathetic nervous system will kick in. It's accompanied by a whole host of physical situations like the release of cortisol. Then we have our parasympathetic too. Parasympathetic is really our break, or our slow down, rest, recovery system. And this is the state, again, of your nervous system. If we're running overly sympathetic, though, we're going to feel stressed. We're going to feel anxious. We're going to feel fear. We're going to feel like the physiological effects of this, like shooting sensations of adrenaline through, or electricity, kind of buzzy sensations through our hands. And if we're feeling parasympathetic, or if our parasympathetic is overly dominant, we feel depressed, we have sleep problems, like this general kind of malaise in our life. And what's a funny situation is sometimes when we delve too much in the parasympathetic, it triggers almost like the sympathetic response, like the foot gets left hard on the gas, and like we poorly regulate our energetic state. Like we turn off workouts and we don't feel like pushing our full limits. We try and rest and recover, but all we can do is keep our mind active on Instagram or TikTok, and we're just scrolling. As we spoke about in the last episode, we have the vagus nerve in the center of your body. It's the main connector between your brain and your gut. And really what we're trying to do is enable what's called vagal tone in your body. It's like this connection between your brain, which is, I think, according to some parts of our thinking, the brain is probably the main center of consciousness, or there's thoughts that it's actually in the gut and the heart too. But this nerve and the tone of this nerve, so the excitement that nerve feels, and by excitement I mean the kind of electrical stimulation that nerve feels, that is an indicator of how well trained your parasympathetic nerve system is. And what we're trying to do here is to train that so that you can put the brakes on appropriately and you can slow down. And that gives you enough energy, or it gives you the ability to turn up that nerve system regulation piece, turn up that sympathetic response when you need to push hard. So we need to essentially feel the appropriate energy for the task that we're trying to accomplish. Tools you can use to do this: sleep hygiene, breath work, cold exposure, yoga nidra, a bunch more. So this is the regulation piece. This is the first step really of training your mindset. And it goes alongside rewiring. Rewiring, essentially what it is changing the story that you believe. Because if you believe something, you will act it out. And these beliefs are essentially our truths that we hold in a subconscious way. If you've ever wondered how you surprise yourself, or why you surprise yourself, why you do things that disappoint you, or excite you or surprise you or shock you in any kind of way, it's because we hold our truths subconsciously. We're aware, obviously, consciously in our mind. We are aware, we can think clearly, but really, and this is kind of like a rational, logical approach. But the vast majority of our mental and kind of the vast majority of what we're doing is subconscious. There's a bunch of fMRI studies which show a whole bunch of things, and the data is mixed. But what they're trying to test in the studies that I'm talking about is how much your subconscious is in control compared to your conscious mind. We can put a number on this. Like there's some that say like 7 seconds before your conscious mind is aware, your subconscious mind is aware. Some kind of studies, they all change. You don't need to worry about it too much. But what you do need to know, the important thing to take away from this, is that your subconscious mind determines a whole bunch of what you do. And your subconscious mind is operating the story that it believes about you. And this story becomes your truth. It's what you live by. And unless you change that, you'll always live by that story. So some common examples that are kind of beliefs that people live by. CrossFit is shit. Okay. CrossFit is the worst training methodology ever. It's dangerous, and you can kind of predict everything that everyone's going to do because of this belief system. Or CrossFit is great. Again, like not taking sides of the fence here. Like when someone believes that CrossFit is great, you can predict a whole bunch of things that they're going to be doing. You can predict their reactions to things. They embody this, and it becomes the way they train, the way they think, the way they feel. It determines their emotions, their thought patterns, their self-worth in many occasions. But of course, it's not just related to CrossFit. To take a controversial topic here, like if we take the Christian or Islamic or Hindu worldview, those are all viewed as a belief system, as is, I might add, the atheist viewpoint. This is a kind of a belief system that we share, and that some of us believe is true, and it determines how we act in the world. It determines who we are. Vaccinations versus anti-vaxxers, like all these stories, they're a belief system that we pick up. The most important thing is, though, we think that a lot of these stories are something we've rationally thought about, that we logically thought about, but we're forgetting that the root of these stories is often things that we've just happened to pick up, that we just grew up around, or we had a traumatic experience around when we were younger, or we've got so frustrated around our certain results that we picked up this story, and then that becomes our reality. These beliefs are not all bad, though, because they essentially behave as a shortcut for our actions, what's known as heuristics. So if I believe X, then my action becomes Y. Some of these are going to be very, very useful. Like if I see my stove is red, I'm not going to touch it because I believe that stove is going to be hot. That's a belief system too. So it becomes a shortcut to not do stupid things. But when these shortcuts are untrue to the outside world, they limit us. And when we believe things like I'm not good enough, I'm struggling, I'm always going to be an outsider, I don't deserve to be at this level of competition, that becomes our reality. That becomes our truth without even thinking about it. So we need to learn to question this. So the problem arises when these thoughts, when these beliefs, when they divert from actual truth. You'll notice these when you feel kind of emotional triggers. Like you'll notice you'll know your story is out of alignment with truth when you notice mental emotional spikes in salience. So if you're struggling with your motivation, if you're self-sabotaging, if you are experiencing negative self-talk, if your emotions are all over the place and they're derailing your progress, if your fear is running the show, if all you hear in your mind is, I'll never be good enough, there's a strong chance that your story that you believe is untruthful, is out of line with who you need to be. So where did they come from? They come from the 4 E's, like I spoke about: the education, what you're explicitly told; your environment, what you implicitly pick up; evolution, so your biology, and your experience, which is what you learn to be true through trying and failing. And then we can also look at this as well. Like we can look at it through a traumatic lens as well, or a trauma-based lens. Some of us have big, obvious traumas that happen to us. Like myself, I can talk about bullying as a kid, experience palpitations. That was, I'd say, 2 pretty traumatic episodes in my life. Like I can think of others that aren't kind of for public consumption, but you may be able to look back at your life and think, I have something that is highly traumatic there, and this is how it shaped my life, and it's obvious. But far more common, actually not far more common, just as common in life, are the little t traumas, the traumas that are felt as a child when we are unseen, unheard, unloved, undervalued, when we don't feel like we are listened to. These form traumatic results in our mind-body, our body-mind, just as much as anything else. So let's talk about the process of training these and changing your mindset. How do we drop those stories? How do we stop believing them to be absolutely true? Well, first of all, we have to test, find out what they actually are, figure out what's holding us back. And we have to find the story that's there, the mental emotional triggers that are there. We have to find the actions that surround it, the emotions that surround it. All these kind of things, we have to bring them to light. We have to get to know it, because how can we change anything if we don't know it intimately? Then we have to create a vision of what our life would be like if we didn't have that, because it gives you something to aim at in the daily moment. If you're struggling with something, if you've got a limiting belief there, you need to know what the opposite of it is. What's the truthful option? Like, what can you aim at? What's a better version of success for you to look at? Then we have to develop presence so that when we fall into these poor patterns of behavior, we can jump out of them. If we're present enough, as opposed to just falling unconsciously into the next action. And then we have to take proof, or we have to make proof. And proof comes in 2 parts. We have to do things that challenge that belief, and we have to develop like a positive reinforcement approach to the to training that belief and showing you that the old limiting belief is untrue and the new enhancing, serving belief is true. How do we do this? How do we start to change our story? Well, we use journaling a lot. It's not the only option because there's conversation, but journaling is a great way to get your thoughts out onto paper and to see them for what they are. And also when we are writing out things, it kind of makes things more permanent. There's, again, a bunch of studies that show that journaling is a very effective tool to access the subconscious and also change beliefs. I'm not going to go into them here, but that's what you need to know, essentially, that writing things down is better than just kind of thinking these things through. First one, observe your inner athlete. Like, this is like, I'll go into these at some point during the podcast. Now is not the right time, but essentially getting your thoughts out onto paper. Direction reviews, setting where you want to go, looking at the type of person you want to be using that AMWAP, so as many wins as possible, generating positivity. We've got like forms of visualization on a macro level. We've even got like physical, like typically thought of as regulation opportunities like yoga nidra, things that enhance or put our brainwave state into a slightly more malleable state. And then we've got things like just taking action. A bit of willpower here does actually help. Like, it shouldn't be completely dismissed. So those are some tools. And so far we have the 2 most fundamental pieces of the RRP method: regulation of the nervous system and rewiring. When you've started to do that effectively, you'll notice changes in your mindset. You'll notice things start to feel different. And then we want to put it into action when it actually counts. Maybe this is in your training and competition. Maybe it's just general training sessions. Maybe it's trying to improve your mobility routine. Maybe it's work related, having conversations better. Maybe it's being more productive. So the first thing to note is this is a very individual process. What works for one person may not work for someone else. And there's so many tools here that it's very intuitive what you use, and it's very kind of feel based. Like, with some people are going to respond to a lot of structure here and a lot of like discipline, a lot of force, and some people are a bit more fluid. Did a podcast previously where we talked about Some people move the piano, are there to be structured, they have to be there on time. Some people play the piano, they turn up late, they turn up and kind of and openly, like kind of they're a bit more virtuosic. They're more virtuosos is what I'm trying to say. And I can't remember the name of the guy that we shared this with. That's shocking behavior, pressure. But yeah, he spoke about this on our podcast before. But the point that we're trying to get to is that we're very individual in our application of this. The purpose of this, though, the guiding principle is to find the freedom to perform. We perform our best when we're not forcing. We perform our best when we open ourselves up to that performance and we're authentic and genuine and living truthfully to ourselves. We fail to find our best performance when we're forcing, when we're too stressed, when we're too rigorous, when we're trying to hold on, when trying to control too much. That always leads to poor performance. We want to find the freedom to perform, to dance on the border of chaos and order, to have like enough of a balance in the known, so structure and routine, but enough of excitement to go and push and to go beyond perfection, to truly do something new and individual, and try and find that place of effortless effort. If you've done the first two pieces, the brakes are off in this point, and you can just find the techniques that put you into this area. If you're in basically, if the other two places are absolutely perfect, this just happens, but you're never going to get absolutely perfect. So you'll have to do some things to push you into this area. There's some key variables that you can minimize here. And one of them is the amount of unknown that you have. So the more unknown that's there, the more your mind is trying to process new things, is trying to understand the environment that you're in. And one thing we can do here to minimize this is simply visualize the event that you're going through. If you know the events in advance, get outside there and visualize it. If you like know the environment, if you know the wherever the event is being held, or if you know wherever the competition is being held, if you know what that looks like and feels like to be there, visualize yourself being there and feeling confident and structured. Like if you can rehearse events, go and do that. If there's any way you can reduce the number of unknowns, do that, and that will help you to perform. And also, what we want to try and do, it's a challenging thing to do, but where we can get to is drop the number of expectations whilst holding our standards high. As soon as we expect to perform in a certain way, chances are you're not going to perform in that way. As soon as you expect a workout to go a certain way, things will change. So give yourself effort-based objectives. That's again a whole topic for another day, and it would create a massively long podcast. But give yourself effort-based objectives, because when we focus on the outcome, we suffer. And also give yourself worst and best case scenarios. Give yourself something to focus on in the worst case and the best case. Like, what are you going to do in case of SOPs, standard operating procedures? In case of X, do Y. We have to develop a competition prep process. That's absolutely critical to performance. How are we building up to this? Putting yourself in the best place. And honestly, a lot of this can just be placebo, but it's feeling like we are in the right place that makes a huge benefit for people. And then when we're in training as well, we can work on practicing, on training on the character skills that we want to display in our workouts. So that's the perform piece. And it's the final piece in the RRP method. So regulate, rewire, and perform. In a few weeks, and you're going to have to get onto Instagram for this because I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. We're going to be hosting a webinar where we truly dive into this, where we give you the real insights in how to apply this to your life. And we're going to explain a bunch of techniques and give you even more detail on this. And it's also alongside special guest Khan Porter. I can't remember how many times Khan's been at the CrossFit Games, but he is also a mental health, I'd say, advocate, leader, thought leader in this area. And he is going to be joining us to give his insights into the RRP method and how you can use it to apply it to your life and your training too. So it's going to be a small charge to it. I think it's going to be like £40, $50, something like that. So it's definitely going to be worth coming to. But I can't remember everything off the top of my head. You're going to have to find a way to get more information, which the only way to do that is to head to Instagram and find us, which is Mindset RX and Mindset Rx'd, Romeo X-Ray Delta. And yeah, look for some more information, wait for the posts, and you'll get your information there. Anyway, foundation of creating change is your body, mind is interlinked. Like, we have to realize that these three parts of our performance, the rewiring of our nervous rewiring of the story that we have, the regulation of our nervous system, the performance aspect, they're all inexplicably linked. They're perfectly reliant on each other. And we have to train all three at once. And that's how we create growth as an athlete. Anyway, team, make sure you follow us on Instagram, Mindset Rx'd, for more information. I'm going to put out bite-sized pieces of these podcasts. I'm going to go into more depth into more podcasts. And next week, we actually are going to be doing a case study. So I'll see you soon. And if you've got any questions about mindset, any topic ideas, reach out to me on our Instagram, again, Mindset Rx'd, or maybe my personal Instagram too, Tom Foxley, Tom, Foxley. Speak to you soon, team, and enjoy training this week.